here on Willard and Dibbs. We're joined by Odyssey NFL insider Mark Schlereth, host of the Stinkin' Truth podcast. Insider calls are brought to you by Hellman's Real Mayonnaise. Mayo game day. Be delicious. Happy New Year, Stink. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
We're doing good. We know you called the game, and I know this was a weird one, and the Niners had a lot of their backups in and whatnot, but seeing them in person and watching them complete a 6-11 campaign, and also talk to the people in the building, I would imagine, were you able to kind of gather everything or anything as to why this just went wrong?
Yeah, well, I think obviously injuries, and everybody gets injured, but a lot of injuries. Talking to Chris Forster, your offensive line coach, who's one of the best run coach / run game coordinators, O-line coaches, and 6 different guys on the O-line went on IR. When you're playing backups, especially at that position, it's interesting how the league operates in today's game. You've got 8 to 10 guys, 12 guys that you pay 75% of your salary, 80% of your salary to, and then the rest of everybody else is, fighting over the leftovers. And ultimately, when those guys get hurt or those guys play hurt or those guys aren't up to snuff, and you have to replace them with backups in today's game, it's just different. Like when I came into the National Football League and I'm playing for the Washington Redskins, every one of our backup offensive linemen had 4 years of starting in the league at some other place. And they came in, and so when somebody went down, somebody came in for the most part and had, a lot of time, a lot of service in the National Football League. And it's just the way rosters are constructed. We pay so much money to the superstars that we try to cut corners and save money by keeping guys on our roster that really don't have a lot of experience or really shouldn't be playing in the National Football League. So there's an issue there. I think the other thing, frankly, is 3 straight years to a Super Bowl or an NFC championship. I think that's a mentally and physically tired football team. You're playing another, 4 weeks, 3 games, whatever it is, over the course of 3 years. It wears on you. And I think you saw a team that just got tired and physically tired and mentally tired and the whole 9 yards. So, I think there was a lot to overcome there. And, I look for them to bounce back, to rebound, and be right back to being one of the top teams in the NFC next year.
And facing the last place schedule next year and also taking on the South in the AFC and the NFC should help unless those teams do get a lot better. I want to ask you about the depth, Stink, and particularly the offensive line and the running back position. When you look at what this team was putting out there toward the end of the year, is that where they started to fall short, just not having enough good quality NFL players on the O-line?
Yeah, that's huge. When you're starting a left tackle who was on the practice squad of Arizona, a week earlier, that's hard. Like that's hard to do that. And then you start to think about, when you have that situation, then you have to understand we got to mitigate the potential issues there. So what are we going to do from a protection standpoint? What kind of plays are we going to call? How much does it limit your playbook when you're playing with backups? How many things can you do? How many things do those guys understand? How many things can those guys execute? So instead of attacking your opponent offense or, as an offense, instead of attacking your opponent, which you're normally trying to do, half the time you're just trying to mitigate potential disaster. So you're not going after somebody's weaknesses as much as you are just trying to protect your own weaknesses. And so all that stuff lays into it. All that stuff plays into it. I know that it's disappointing, but at the same time, I still watch them on film and still see what they're capable of, and think, boy, they get healthy and they get that right, that they're going to be a good football team.
Stink, we were just debating the merits of Dre Greenlaw going forward. He's a free agent, and so it's hard to figure out based on the injury situation and when he came back, he kind of gets hurt again, but he's been such a great player. As someone who's had 4 million surgeries like yourself, can you speak to what that's like when you have a major injury and can you come back and be yourself again?
Yeah, can you come back and be yourself? I think that's the interesting question. One of the things I always tell guys, and I get occasionally, people reach out to me, agents reach out to me, or players reach out to me that have had some injury issues. And one of the things I always tell guys is that you've got to create a new 100%. And that new 100% may be 80% of what it used to be, but that's your new 100%. And then you've got to just go, I'm good enough to be really good and, and have the challenge of playing that way. But I see a lot of guys, or I think, this way, that a lot of people will kind of, I'm not quite 100% myself right out of a job. And when you're cleared to play, you're healthy enough to play, it may not be 100% and it may not be 90%. It may be 75%. But you got to figure out how to play, what your new parameters are at 75%. You got to be able to go out there and not only play, not only start, but go out there and play well. And so I think that's the challenge mentally of getting over that and being okay saying, hey, man, I'm 85% of what I used to be, but I'm still really good, even at this 85%. And that's where your mental growth of the game really starts to take over. So as you lose athleticism and as you lose ability, you better be gaining those mental edges and how I can cheat this game to produce and how I can study and how I can see things through a different lens. And so there's a lot that goes into being able to play hurt. I've always said, hey, man, not only do you have to play hurt in this league, but you have to play injured. And more importantly, you have to play well hurt and injured. And it was one thing over the course of my career I could always do. I could always go out feeling like garbage and being injured and still find a way to whip your ass. And that was, that's a badge of honor, and that's something that was what I truly embraced. And that's something that you've got to be able to do.
Yeah, and it's something Fred Warner did all year long when he was playing hurt, and he probably was playing injured. And you had me thinking about Brock Purdy when you were talking about the mental aspect, because I was watching him all year, Mark, and it seemed like he was playing with a little bit of the thought in the back of his mind, like he had to do something special to try to earn the contract. How hard is it to be in a spot like that with big money awaiting and still go out there and trust the process and still play the way you're supposed to play?
Yeah, I think I ultimately it's easy to say, well, you just got to, put it to the side and not think about it, and it's just not realistic. You're human, and it's interesting. Every guy is different. I always kind of marvel at the guys who have a lot of things going on in their lives, a lot of issues or whatever. They can use the field as a sanctuary, and just forget about problems, forget about issues, and just go out there and play their butts off. I wasn't one of those guys, man. Things had to be right. Like I couldn't have a lot of strife in my life or anything. Things had to be good for me because, I wore that stuff on my sleeve. So I just think that's a really hard thing to do. And you think about those things and you want to be perfect. You want to go out there and earn that. You want to, show the organization that you're worth it. And ultimately, I think Brock Purdy played pretty well considering all the injuries up front, the injuries to all the running backs, the changes you have to make offensively as a coaching staff because you can't do the things that you're normally capable of doing. Like all those things, you limit your playbook, all that stuff. So I think ultimately he played really well. And, and again, he's not like he's up for a contract renegotiation, but he still has another year left on his contract. So you're going to have to come to grips with, you're probably not going to get top dollar. You're probably not going to break the bank or set the market, but you can still make generational money. So you've got to come to grips with that about getting a new contract done.
Insider calls are brought to you by Hellman's Real Mayonnaise. You can purchase Hellman's at your local Walmart, Kroger, or grocery store to add extra deliciousness and creamy flavor to your game day dishes. This football season, we're hanging with Stink, Mark Schlereth, right here on Willard and Dibbs 95.7 The Game. Mark, how did you view the Deebo Samuel year? And I think the two answers seem to be he's lost a step or the way he's being used, defense is sort of caught up to it. How did you see it?
I saw it as, one, a guy that had some nagging injuries throughout the course of the season that really bothered him. Two, Deebo's superpower isn't I'm a great route runner. Deebo's superpower is I go out and catch the ball and run you over. So for him to be an incredibly effective football player, you got to get the ball in his hands. And the way they got the ball in his hands over the last few years is run the snot out of the ball, set it up, open up that play action, get him the ball in space with nobody around him, and he's going to break tackles and make big-time plays. Those things got shut down this year. Those things with the multiple different backs. You don't have Christian McCaffrey as a threat. You don't Jordan Mason wasn't the greatest pass catcher out of the backfield. You used five different backs over the course of the year. So you never really were able to consistently get into the plays and into the playbook part that really where Deebo Samuel just excels. He's not an X or just lining up over here and running this great route. I mean, he just uses his body. He's so strong at the point of the catch. And Kyle Shanahan has described him to me on more than one occasion as a fullback that happens to play wide receiver. That's who he is with his body type and the way he plays.
So when you look at ways to get him into that spot, did you look at the team this year and think that it was the scheme that was unable to get him into those spots that we've seen in the past, or is it more just a byproduct of not having McCaffrey and not having Ayuk, and so defenses were able to key on him much more readily?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I mean, you don't have Ayuk. Ayuk is a legit threat out there, right? And he's a guy that you've got to contend with, and so he ties up more people in coverage. You're less likely to just single him up. You're more likely to have somebody over the top, or maybe a safety over and swoop a linebacker underneath, or something of that nature, where you're trying to take him away from that. I love Juwan Jennings, but he's not the same guy out there at X. He doesn't do that for you. So yeah, I think a lot of it had to do with just the way the season played out. I don't think it's like, I hear these ridiculous things about, well, Kyle Shanahan, that everybody's catching up to his system. No, that's not it. It's that you didn't have the same horses. You didn't have the offensive line. You broke down at the running back position. You don't have a running back that motions outside the numbers and threatens you like a wide receiver. Like there's a lot of different things that went on there. And it's funny sitting there talking to, defense coordinator for Arizona, the Cardinals, a guy by the name of Nick Wallace. I mean, he will tell you it's the toughest. Kyle Shanahan is the toughest coordinator, toughest play caller that I have to face every single year. And as a matter of fact, before I became a play caller, before I became a D coordinator, when I was a quality control guy in the off season, I used to study the Niners and then make up game plans, like entire game plans, how I would, do this or how I would try to do this. Like, that's the kind of respect that Kyle Shanahan has around the National Football League. And that's not unique to Nick Brawless. That's everybody you talk to. So, it is one of those things. It's an unfortunate year. You won 6 games. It's not what you wanted to have happen. But I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm just trying to give you reasons why things happen.
Sting, can you expand on that a little bit? When you have a conversation with a defensive coordinator and he says Kyle Shanahan's the hardest play caller to prepare for, why? What is that makes it so difficult?
He does a great job of attacking your weaknesses, a great job of setting up big plays off the things he calls, and a great job of adjusting to anything you give him. So, he's got a photographic memory of what you're doing, what you're trying to take away, and what works against that. And, ultimately, he's got such an unbelievable knowledge of what you're doing on the defensive side, what your rules are on the defensive side. Like, Kyle Shanahan operates an offense as though he were a defensive coordinator. I believe he could probably call a game as a defensive coordinator without an issue. He's so versed in what you're doing and so good at attacking the things that you do well, the things that you do poorly. And so, I always say it's not just guys who call plays, it's guys who call an offense. Like guys who understand what they're setting up, why they're setting something up, what they're going to get, and how they're going to attack it. And his dad was the same way. His dad would sit there and tell you, this is the same thing Kyle does. Like, this is what we're going to run. This is why we're going to run it. This is how it's going to work. And this is what they're going to give us, and and then this is the benefit of doing this is you're going to get an explosive off the play action off of this, and you're going to get a big run, and you're going to get a catch, and like he's always been able to do that, and we're going to hit them after we set them up and tenderize them with this, then we're going to get them over the top with this, and it just ends up. I can't tell you how many times I've heard Mike Shanahan when I was playing say, "Oh, dude, we're going to run this X number of times, then we're going to get this off of it," and then all of a sudden the second quarter, here it comes, and you could see it, and he's like, "All right, here we go, we're going to get him on this one." And sure enough, it's wide open. He did the Super Bowl in Super Bowl 33, the big play over the top to Rod Smith. That was set up during the week. We talked about that during the week, and sure enough, we got them in that position in that defense, and Rod Smith goes 80 for a touchdown. It's just what they do.
And I love the idea of tenderizing. You had me thinking about dinner tonight and tenderizing a steak because you're right, the way they do tenderize. And Mark and I were talking before the show about how they had the number one most 20-plus yard pass plays in football this year, yet they were one of the worst red zone offenses. What do you attribute that fact to, the idea that they got in the red zone and then Kyle and the offense couldn't get it done?
Well, that's, again, I would point to personnel. When you get into the red zone, there's so many. I get this. It's always funny to me. I hear coordinators say, "Hey, and you guys have heard this. Oh, 8-man front. We didn't want to bang our head against the wall. We had access to the outside. We're going to throw the ball in these situations, right?" And I said, "Okay." Well, I always say, "Okay. Well, what are you going to do when you get inside the 20?" Because everything's an 8-man front. As a matter of fact, everything's a 9-man front. So now what? Now what are we going to do? And teams that know how to run the ball in those situations have great success. And ultimately, when you've got a revolving department store door at the running back position and you got a beat up offensive line and you're not running the ball effectively, then teams play you different. And then all of a sudden you lose, weapons with Ayuk being out and some of the other things that happen. Like it just is, it's different when you've got, McCaffrey in your backfield, you've got the threat of the run and you've got the threat of the pass, and you've got all these, you can dump it off and you can break tackle. It's just different. So there was some things that went on there, but I think it boils down to how well you run the ball in the red zone and how well you set up your play action off of that stuff to create a little bit of space, because there's not a lot of space in the red zone. When you run a high-low combination route, you're trying to separate a defense. It just doesn't separate. Everybody plays kind of high to low. So being able to run the ball in there, in that area, is just imperative to you having success.
Stink, if I took away the 1 seeds, who do you think would go to the Super Bowl?
I think right now, Baltimore, they've fixed their defense. Their defense was atrocious for a long time. They've made some adjustments on the defensive side of the ball, and they're playing really well. That Hamilton kid is playing. He still plays a lot in the line of scrimmage, but they've moved him back more to being a free safety, and he just erases plays. He's still a great run defender as well. I think Humphrey at the cornerback position is playing great football right now, and they're just better. They've just gotten a lot better up front. They're starting to pressure people and win their one-on-ones and do those things. So they're just playing a lot better there. And then they know how one thing I think they will not forget this year is how they are built, how they are structured, their identity. They have got to run the ball both with Lamar and with King Henry. And then, off of that, they get all those one-on-one opportunities in their drop-back game, all that man stuff, all free access to the outside. And Lamar has just been pinpoint in that stuff. He's been so good. The one thing they can't do, if you drop back 40 times, you do like you did in Kansas City, where you gave last year, you gave your running back 6 attempts or 8 attempts or whatever it was. I just don't think they're going to fall victim to that again. They are going to run the ball. They're going to run their team the way they've run it all season, or at least these last 6-8 weeks, and they've been exceptional doing it.
You like anybody in the NFC?
In the NFC, other than Detroit, I like Philly. Now, again, I think they're the two best rosters in football. Detroit's been beat up. Anzalone coming back the other night was big time for them. He was really, really good. I think Detroit, you can make an argument, has the best roster in football. But, Jalen Hurts still hasn't passed the concussion protocol. So, that's really interesting to me. I think, we all assume he's going to be fine. I assume he's going to play. I don't think it's going to be an issue, but I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that game's coming up here pretty quick.
Yeah. 1:30 Sunday. Yeah.
Hey, Stink, wonderful having you as always. Wonderful all season long. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, man. Be well.
Okay, you too,
Mark. Yeah.
That was Odyssey NFL Insider Mark Schlereth, host of the Stinkin' Truth podcast. Insider calls are brought to you by Hellman's Real Mayonnaise. Mayo game day. Be delicious.